So we're here with Jasen Jones, the Executive Director for the Workforce Investment Board of Southwest Missouri, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about their labor supply certification report that they received from Growth Services Group. Before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about your background in economic development?
Yes, I was working in local economic development and through a couple of chambers of commerce after my career in radio broadcasting. And one of the biggest challenges I faced in economic development certainly was around being able to expand and attract companies in a very, very, very tight labor market of the late 90s and into the early 2000s and such. And that's actually what inspired me to come to this position at the Workforce Board, was to actually use my economic development background and be able to create a better value for the region in terms of workforce and the integration of workforce and economic development.
So are you on any national boards that are involved with economic development as well?
The board that I represent on the national level is actually the National Steering Committee for ACT state organizations, which has been a very rewarding experience, not so much on obviously site selection and some of the other factors, but being able to take a very deep dive with public education, post-secondary education, bringing in some of the workforce components and actually being able to contribute some of our local innovations and insights into ACT's research and their public policy efforts.
Excellent. Okay. Tell us a little bit more about your region so we can get a feel of your experience in the layout of the land demographically, economically.
The Southwest Missouri region includes the Joplin metropolitan area as the center economic hub of the region, if you will. We represent 7 counties here in Southwest Missouri. What's very interesting about this labor market is it stretches over into portions of 3 other states that we often refer to as the 4-state area. So we have part of our region in the metropolitan area for Northwest Arkansas and also into Northeast Oklahoma and some of the Native American tribes there, as well as moving into Southeast Kansas. So we collaborate with our neighboring WIBs extensively in terms of working with all employers and all job seekers across the labor market, regardless of what corner of what state they may live in. The area, as far as Joplin, the 2-county MSA is roughly 150,000 in population, and our workforce area is just under 300,000. But when you factor in the daily traffic into Joplin, our Joplin day traffic count is over 250,000, and certainly working with partnerships of those neighboring WIBs of an area that's well over 500,000.
Excellent. Okay, that is quite a diverse area from
Indeed.
Rural to tribal to metropolitan
Yes.
areas. So I don't
Absolutely.
think there's probably not a more diverse area that we could cover. So you've got a great experience for the different challenges in the different areas that one might face. Tell us a little bit about the economy there. I mean, you mentioned it was challenging when you started. What's it look like now? What are your challenges you're facing, and what are the benefits that you're facing right now?
Certainly. As an economic hub, we have quite a bit in terms of healthcare and retail. But as far as some of the big driver industries, we have a strong manufacturing background that was really built on a heritage of lead and zinc mining. And those workers kind of transformed into advanced manufacturing throughout the mid part of last century. With the proximation of our 2 interstate highways, we're only the 3rd location in Missouri to have the junction of 2 or more interstate highways. And so warehousing, distribution, transportation, logistics, those are all very active sectors in our region as well.
Excellent. Okay, so that gives us an idea of your background and where you're coming from. So tell us the nature of this report that you received from GSG.
The labor supply certification that we received from Growth Services Group was very essential in terms of getting a handle on our labor market, really post-recession and post-tornado disaster recovery. We had a very devastating tornado in 2011 that, as you can imagine, kind of hit the big reset button on our local and regional economy. So as we were going in with the implementation of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and really just kind of needing to get a stronger handle on where our economy was headed from the labor market, it was really time to have an updated labor study done. It had been over 5 years since our previous study. And as far as implementing new initiatives, we really wanted to get a handle on measuring underemployment and some of those psychographic characteristics that are really motivating the job seekers in our labor market. What's driving them to make employment decisions? And we even had GSG go a little deeper with us and ask some questions in regards to interest in training as well. So that equipped us really to look at the demand from the supply side, if you will, if that makes sense, but what job seekers are looking for in the ways of those competitive characteristics that employers are moving in and out of course, and also get a temperature on their willingness to invest time in their skill attainment as well.
So really this supply report covers the underemployment, the unemployment, and just the characteristics of that population.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Had it been some time since you had a report, or is this the first report your area has?
Our region had two reports previously, I believe in 2000 and again roughly in 2006. So it had been almost a decade since we had an updated report, and was very much time to re-examine where we were headed in our labor market with their willingness as we were beginning to implement sector strategies and some other initiatives to engage those separated from the labor market or really disenfranchised from employment, getting into that underemployment and the unemployed category, finding out characteristics about the individuals as a whole, what they represent with their education and backgrounds and such. So it was very helpful as we're thinking about several things, a strategic level with the workforce, obviously, and making sure that we can understand them better and how to offer programs and services to them that will help them, transition and continue to transform their careers through the labor market.
Excellent. Okay. So what's your feeling as an economic development professional about a 10-year-old labor report? When you're trying to attract new business in your area, you show them this report that was taken a decade ago. I mean, that would have been pre-disaster and things like that. So tell us about the age of a report and how that affects the opinions of site selectors and things like that.
Absolutely. The demand now and really the reasonable standard is as much real-time data as you can get. Now, it's certainly maybe not up to the second, but what can we do with data that's fresh enough to be, trustworthy and believable, reliable and such? And of course, with the previous study being in 2006, that was before the national recession. It was before Joplin's tornado and the resulting disaster recovery ahead of that. And so really coming in with the WIOA implementation, it was just time to have another peek at the labor market and better understand the drivers of those job seekers, regardless of their walk of life, in terms of what's motivating them to make career and training decisions.
So what would be the impact of not having a report like this then?
We all know, looking around the nation, that site selectors, investors in those business startups and new projects, expansions and such, often have that concern that ranks in the top 5 generally in terms of cost and availability and even quality of the labor supply. So with Joplin being at the crossroads of I-44 and I-49, our location is very attractive to investment, but those investors need to know that the workforce is going to be here to be responsive to their investment in terms of individuals ready to, seek new careers with a new or expanding company. So with data that old, I think it would tell site selectors that there's not a lot of attention or care, being maintained on the labor market, and that maybe their investments are better elsewhere, which is, of course, the exact opposite of what we want. So we want to be able to provide the most reliable picture of the labor market and what that data is telling us. And we can combine that with a number of other resources that we have here in terms of, growth projections and trends and certifications, credentials, and the like, that really make a complete package once we understand the psychographics of the labor market and what investors can reasonably expect.
Excellent. Okay. Tell us a little bit by why you chose this report from Growth Services Group. What were some of the data points or the factors that influenced your choice in this matter?
Our previous provider of labor studies was using a research method that depended on making household telephone calls, which we know in this day and age is not as reliable, as most individuals are on mobile devices and not connected to landlines per se. So in evaluating the proposals that came in to do a labor supply certification study, we were drawn to GSG's approach in terms of what they were doing with social media and other channels in terms of recruiting in essence, the potential survey sample.
So I guess the recent election can show you the quality of surveying using phones.
Absolutely, yeah. Polls may or may not be as accurate depending on a number of different characteristics. And so as we were evaluating through the board of directors the bid that came in for GSG, there were a lot of questions around the validity and the methodology of the research. And we were very comfortable with the approach that GSG brought into the project and the end results.
Okay. Tell us also about the difference between the use of primary data and secondary data.
We have a lot of secondary data that we depend on at the web. A lot of it is publicly available, but we have subscription services too to some of the algorithms that can help us manage that data and look at it from different viewpoints and such. However, there's always a lag in some of the secondary data based on, the required reports that employers make and, the states turn in and so forth. So the secondary data has, a certain amount of value, but very limited when compared to the ability to do the primary data. So the primary data, of course, is not available from any other source, and that was very attractive to our stakeholders to get insights that they had never before seen from other sources.
You've seen a few of these types of reports in your day. Tell us what makes the difference. You mentioned the difference of the survey quality, the survey sources. Any other aspects of a report that makes it an effective report or more effective than a different kind of report?
Our report from GSG was very effective in terms of the way that questions were asked and then the way that GSG was able to categorize the answers and so forth. We were able to look very deeply at a number of characteristics, not just for all of the participants as a whole of the survey, but also those that fell in those categories of, being underemployed or employed but actively seeking, or those that are completely separated from the labor market altogether. We were able to develop, if you will, a user profile of the job seeker in our labor market based on that category mentioned that we had earlier, but also, aspects of their education, their average number of experience on the years on the job and such, some very critical elements that provide us a lot of insights that we didn't have previously.
Tell us about the difference of the people creating the report. Obviously, GSG, their principals there have backgrounds in economic development themselves versus
Yes.
just education. So are their perspectives, you think, a little bit more on target than another type of report, an educational source might be?
Indeed, we found GSG's capacity very friendly to work with in terms of their approach, not only bringing in economic development and knowing what those stakeholders and site selectors need to be seeing, but also a very plain language approach that was very helpful to our employer stakeholders, the news media, elected officials, and others that were able to see the research completed and how helpful that was to the region. There's a wide array of expertise within GSG and the individuals that they work with in terms of bringing the report together. The researchers conducting the surveys and talking to participants, the report writers, a host of experts behind the scenes at GSG that made this very effective.
So what do you feel like the direct impact on job creation will be with this type of report?
Representing the human capital assets of Joplin and Southwest Missouri is extremely important to potential investors so they have an understanding that our labor pool is much larger than what you would see on a population side or trying to compute, a U3 unemployment rate. By factoring in those that are underemployed and those that are working, the working poor, but actively seeking to make their lives better, we really get a larger labor pool than what traditional sources might reveal. That's very comforting to the types of employers that we're wanting to attract to the region and the ones that we're wanting to incentivize for expansions in terms of looking for those jobs that are going to give our citizens an edge up in terms of coming out of poverty and such, connecting to the labor market in more productive ways. So it's very helpful from an attraction and expansion standpoint to make sure we have an accurate depiction of our labor market and really overcome the fears of potential investors and helping them manage their risk.
Tell us about the impact of this report on present employers. How did they use this report?
We did a number of presentations after the report came out throughout the region, different employer panels and workshops and such. This was very helpful as much like other growth-oriented markets around the country, the Joplin region is certainly in a tighter labor market now than it was pre-recession and during the tornado recovery and so forth. So it was very helpful to employers that had expressed concerns about adequate candidate pools that they could look at the benchmark established through the GSG study and be able to evaluate on their companies whether they were truly competitive in terms of the wages and benefits offered, maybe looking at different targeted populations based on the radius of the desired commuting ranges and such. It was very helpful to the existing employer base to see what it would take to go to the top of the heap, if you will, in competing for new workers.
How did this report affect or help the education community in preparing your workforce in your area?
So in our workforce region, we are very actively partnered with education, economic development employers in terms of some of the new career pathways, opportunities, and micro-credentialing, different training and apprenticeship programs that are in the process of rolling out across Southwest Missouri. Those partnerships got a lot out of being able to see the insights of that report in terms of education levels of the different categories of workforce that were studied in the report. It helped the educators and planners kind of see what's going on in the market now in terms of the education levels and the willingness of individuals to engage in short-term training.
This report has a lot of age breakout detail in it. It has an 18 to 29-year-old segment, and then a 30 to 54, and then a 55 to 64-year-old breakout. How is that level of detail helping your community have a better understanding of the workforce?
The stakeholders that are involved in planning for the workforce system and our economic development strategies need to know very much about the demographics and the various underemployed, employed categories of our workforce. So we have an analysis on what we might do in planning the length of different career pathway options and such, knowing what segment of our labor market might be nearing retirement and how we think about backfilling those opportunities. And even the report had an analysis in terms of retirees and home-based workers, domestic workers, and so forth that gave us some insights on how they might actually come back into the labor market in the future as well. So all the deep demographic analysis provided by GSG was very helpful to understand how workers are coming in and out of the workforce based on age and other demographics.
So are there ways of funding this report that another WIB or another local community could avail themselves of?
Our workforce board actually used some discretionary funding at the state level made available for the transition of WIOA and the implementation of those activities. However, the outcomes of this GSG report are very much aligned with some of the drivers for dislocated workers set aside discretionary funds at the state level, or a local workforce board may want to decide to use some of its formula funding or incentive funding, a number of different categories that would make it available. Previously, our Regional Economic Development Coalition had also participated in funding. And so there are a lot of creative ways that workforce boards and their stakeholders can look at how to pull together the resources for a report of this nature. We found the cost to be very reasonable in terms of the value received, and certainly the process in getting bids and documenting the deliverables of the project were certainly those that met the muster of our accounting staff and monitors and such.
So let's talk a little bit about how this report differentiates between underemployment and unemployment.
It's very important to our workforce board to look at not only the categories of individuals that might be eligible for our services, but really the labor market as a whole. With this report from GSG, we actually went into Kansas and Oklahoma with some of our research because we wanted to get the perspective of the entire labor market too. And the particular interest in the underemployed worker, in other words, what we might consider those that are working poor, that are able to do more if they were in the right situation, the right scenario as far as their transition into gainful employment. As a result, there are stakeholders that we have, community-based organizations and city leaders and so forth, really look to this report to have a better understanding of the working poor than what was provided in our region previously. We also have a chance to look at, like we mentioned earlier, that expanding what looks like our available labor pool by counting the underemployed and being able to show that our available labor pool is much larger to an employer that's willing to offer those advancement opportunities.
Does it also cover mid-range workers that are receiving more of a normative midline salary, and what might motivate them to move or change jobs?
Absolutely. In terms of the analysis of the working individuals, the underemployed, and those willing to change, they actually do come from a wide array of income and education levels. So it's very helpful to have that complete analysis.
So that would be probably particularly informative for present employers to know what might motivate someone to change and how competitive their compensation is at this point in time.
It does. It looks at what are those factors that are driving decisions made by job seekers and current workers and such that an employer can look at how to manage not only wages, but even benefits, commuting distance, a number of factors that would affect how they might approach growing their candidate pools and eventually adding to their workforce.
What was your overall experience working with Growth Services Group in receiving this report?
It was a very positive experience that we had with GSG from the very beginning of obtaining a proposal to pulling the trigger and beginning the research. They have lots of great ideas, and we were able to learn from not only GSG but other users of the workforce product as well, some of the other predecessor WIBs before us that took advantage of their services. And so it was a great network in terms of solutions and really even helping us maximize the data that's in the report and how to turn that into actionable strategy.
Would you recommend Growth Services Group to another economic development group that's seeking a report like this?
Absolutely. Any other economic development organization, workforce intermediary such as ours, would find a lot of value in looking at GSG for the provider of labor studies of this nature. The cost is reasonable in terms of the value received, and there's just amazing set of deliverables that really help us do our jobs better. We know more about our labor market as a result of working with GSG, and I think any forward-thinking region, their workforce and economic development partners alike would find a lot of benefit to this approach.
What was the most valuable thing you felt you had working with Growth Services Group?
I think one of the most valuable features of working with GSG was actually in their staff and their capacity with their partnerships and such. There were very knowledgeable people within Growth Services Group that helped fine-tune the questions and really tweak things to make sure that we were getting the right questions asked and getting the right data back from our stakeholders and our citizens.
So Jason, thanks for your time, and we appreciate you, and we wish you well with your report there in your Workforce Investment Board area.
Thank you so much for having me. We appreciate the opportunity.